Hello, I'm Shirley Adams with program number 1 of a brand new series called The Sewing Connection. Now, who I am, I'm a lifetime sewer. I've done it forever and ever for myself, for other people in the family. I have been a teacher for a long time, a college professor at one time of clothing and textiles. Recently, I've been doing a whole lot of live seminars, and live audiences are wonderful because I see people I know, I see myself in them, I see what their problems are. I also write articles for some magazines, and I write a lot of books. And through all of this experience that I've done over the past many years, I'm here to share some of those experiences that I've encountered and problems that I've solved. So I hope that I can answer some of your questions, and I hope I can give you a lot of good ideas, and I hope we can have a lot of fun together. Now, where I get those ideas, well, a lot of places, but I'll get into that later. First of all, though, this sewing series is dedicated to you people who love originality, who want the freedom of choice, putting together the right color with the right fabric in the most flattering style and with a perfect fit. Now, that can't be found on the rack where you have to take pot luck. It's only the woman who sews who can call all the shots and have exactly what she wants every time she sews. So, the Sewing Connection is the way you connect to the world of fashion through your creative sewing. Now, for those who consider saving money the primary motivation in home sewing, it's not really. You can actually find very, very cheap ready-to-wear, which would cost less than making it yourself, so why bother? But it looks cheap, and that's not your style. What you want is quality, individuality, and if it comes at a wonderful price, then we'll take it. For example, I can make 2 ultra suede suits, these 2 suits or coats, and I can throw in a bunch of belts along with those, and I can do this for about the same retail price of one ready-to-wear suit. Well, I love it. What also I can do with these suits is features that you don't find in the ready-to-wear. Because I sew, I can add to it such things as this unusual waistline with the belt woven in and out. And I can add lapels to a pattern that aren't even there in the first place. They weren't on this pattern. So I can do all those things, and I can have exactly what I want, as I say, at a small price. And that makes it even more fun, of course. So the whole sewing adventure begins with fabric, and that beginning is where the excitement starts, because I find myself sort of tingling. I can't find a place or think of a place that I'd more rather walk through than a fabric store. And when I walk through, I do not do it like this. Have you ever seen a woman walk through a fabric shop with her hands in her pockets? Of course not, because fabric is more than visual. Her hands are always on the move. She takes off her gloves also if it's cold weather when she walks in. Her hands are always on the move, and they're touching and they're squeezing to see if it wrinkles, and they're draping to see, is it soft, will it drape, or is it crisp, what's it going to do? They want to see how this fabric's going to react, and so for this reason, fabric hand, as it's called, is our consideration today. And this is going to play a large part in determining the success or failure of your garment, as the wrong fabric in a particular style results in a disaster which can't be easily corrected later. Once you've made something out of the wrong fabric, you're stuck with it, and that's it. So, be very careful about the choice, how you put the fabric together with the pattern, and let your fabric speak. If you just listen, it will tell you what you need to know, and you therefore are going to, or then you're going to have something successful. If you can't decide exactly, gee, is this the right thing to do or not? Is it going to make up as I have planned it? Then look at the pattern that you're planning to use. And on that pattern, they always have suggested fabrics. And on these suggested fabric list, or with this list, you can see, is the fabric that I'm using similar to the crisp or the soft fabric they're suggesting? Because they won't suggest both. It'll either be soft and thin or kind of crisp and tailored. It'll be one or the other. So think through what they're saying when they name those fabrics there. And if you're so inexperienced you don't know what those fabrics are that they're describing, then ask the people in the store. Say, what is this? What is that? They'll tell you about it. So with this one, as I just recently, about 3 days ago, purchased this one, I didn't go into the store for this at all. I just walked into the store and this one just jumped out at me. It cried out to me, "Here I am, don't let me get by, because we pass this way but once, and if you don't grab it now, you're never going to get it." Well, what this one was saying to me is, I would like to be a jacket. I would like to have a band of elastic around the waist. I'd like to have epaulettes up on the shoulder and slightly shoulder pads if I can make it quickly before they go out of style. And I would perhaps find it hard to find buttons to go with this, therefore I might have concealed buttons down the front. So all these things this fabric says to me as I'm looking at and draping it and feeling it and squeezing it. And if you walk through and see the same fabric, except you won't, I got the end of the bolt, but if you would see some fabric that you liked, these are the things you think about. How is it going to work? Now, this particular one might speak a completely different language to you. It might say instead, "I'm a skirt and I'm going to gather at your waist. Whoops, no, that bunches out too much and it's going to make me look kind of chunky. So instead, I will do something without that gathering, maybe a wrap skirt, maybe a sarong type that ties up here." It would tell you something of that sort. Maybe it's going to be a pair of pants on you. But think it through carefully and make sure that whatever it is going to be made into, you can do it successfully. Now, if you would like a little more experience in that, go shop the ready-to-wear. This is always a good beginning, and not the bargain basement. You aren't going to find the ideas there. Shop the very expensive ready-to-wear. When you look through those, you can find how designers have done this, what kind of fabrics they have used. And they do sometimes things that are contrary to what you'd expect. They use fabrics in ways that you wouldn't ordinarily. This one, for instance, 5 years ago, I certainly would never have made this into a jacket, but today I would, because designers, the very expensive ones, are doing this a lot. I usually figure when I go shopping, because I'm not going to buy anything unless it's fabric, I'm not going to buy anything ready to wear. I sew everything I own. Therefore, when I go shopping, I do it in the expensive departments for the ideas, because I figure with the moderate priced, if I can afford it, I probably don't even want it. I really want to get my ideas from the cream of the crop. So this is where I look. And you can then very easily see what kind of notions they put with this, what kind of treatments they give it, such as interfacing. You know, kind of squeeze that ready to wear and see what they've put in the collars or down the front. See if they have interfacing across the back shoulders so that you answer all your questions in advance before you get home and have those same questions in your sewing room. So consider all this very carefully, and then let's get back to fabric hand. Now this is the way it feels, the way it hangs, drapes, the way it handles later on, and the way you can take care of it. All this goes into fabric hand. It's deciding how thick or how thin, or seeing how thick or thin something is. It's seeing how crisp or how soft it is. This one, for instance, this blouse, it's so crisp it rustles, it actually makes some noise here. I could tell right away that I better not put this one in unpressed pleats or any soft styling, because it's going to just poof out and there again add about 20 pounds to you, and most of us don't want those extra 20. So this one I decided to stitch those pleats down completely, and that way it stays slim and trim and it stays just the way it should. Now if you're wondering why I don't have any pleats over here, I'll admit to you, it's because I ran out of fabric. I put so many pleats here. I only had X amount of fabric, so this side of it I just did plain. And that's one of the beauties also of home sewing, the fact that you're the designer. You do what you please, and if something like this happens, just tell whoever asks you why isn't it pleated, just say, "I'm the designer and this is the way I designed it." So it's quite all right. It's also all right if you do it with an asymmetrical closing here. This is why I love to sew women's clothes, and I don't anymore sew for my husband. I used to years ago. I used to demonstrate a sport coat for him every time I teach a tailoring class in graduate school. But now I don't, because his things aren't fun. You can't do everything, so only do the fun things, the things you really love to do, and the things that express you. So it's women's clothes and children's things. Those are the types of clothing that I like most to do, so that's what I'm going to stick with. Here's another one, also a pleated blouse, but this one, look how limp, how soft this is. Not only is it soft, it's see-through, and I don't usually wear see-through things. In fact, I don't ever, I guess. So to make that so that you can't see through it, what I have done with this is really pleated up. I actually have 90 inches of fabric going around this blouse. So it's completely pleated, back, front, every place. That makes it opaque. I can no longer see through it. But also, these pleats aren't even pressed down or stitched down, only at the top to hold them in place and at the bottom where I tuck them in my skirt. Other than that, they don't need to be stitched because they just hold in place very nicely. So this one works out well the way I've done it. Letting that fabric speak for you, which is this first show, letting the fabric speak and listening to it, hearing what it says. What this fabric said to me is that I am striped. I have these little stripes in me. Use that to your advantage. What can you do with the stripes? So what I decided to do was put a yoke on here. I cut the pattern apart, which I'll show you on another program how to do some of this, changing of patterns. But I cut the pattern apart, and with this little top section I made this bib, and on that bib I used twin needle pin tucking. That's using that double needle, and it pinches up a little tuck. Well, I just stitched straight down the stripe, so it was very easy to do, no problem at all. Whereas it could have been a problem had I used solid fabric. I'd have to draw lines or do something to give me a guideline. This way I was doing a quick job, I was doing it easily, I was doing it with complete confidence and knowing it had come out beautifully each time because I was working with the stripes. By the way, since the stripes were there, instead of doing gathers in the sleeve, why not here again? Just use that little pin tucking and put in that extra fullness in the sleeve by doing the pin tucks there also. Give it that designer look. Make it a little bit more special than you'd ever find in the ready-to-wear. Here's another one that's pleated, and this also was done so easily just because of the striped fabric. I wouldn't have attempted this on solid fabric, but with those stripes, no problem. I could very easily, throughout the body of this blouse, pleat on the stripes. I could put all the crosswise pleats there on one stripe with the iron, press them all down, and then take it to the machine and stitch right along the stripes so that it would come out perfectly every time. Something else I did to help myself out a little bit is eliminate the side seam. I like to do this on some things. No side seam there under the arm because I thought I'd have to then match all those stripes and get them all together. It's easier to have everything work out just beautifully if you eliminate a seam, which you can do as long as they're both straight lines. Just overlap them, cut it all out as one piece, and you won't have to worry about matching those later. So think ahead with all these things. Not only using the fabric appropriately, but also think ahead so that you can see what's going to work easiest for you. Here are some wools, but wools are all different. This one, for instance, is a very soft wool. So what I've chosen to do with this green dress is to put unpressed pleats here, just very soft pleats, folds going into the bodice, into the midriff area here, from both the skirt and from the bodice, so that they just hang nicely. It's utilizing that soft quality that a wool jersey has. On the other hand, this one is not soft at all. This one is quite crisp. It actually is a menswear suiting, and so I used it more as a man would, at least in the jacket. I put a few gathers in the skirt, but in the jacket I have these vented pockets here with the flap on it. I've done everything sort of in a man-tailored way because this is what the fabric said it would like to be. And so it worked out very well that way. As long as you listen to it and work accordingly, you'll just be really thrilled with the results. So also you have a little matching to do with this one, which we won't talk about right now, but be sure if you get a plaid, a stripe, anything of that sort, be sure that you do match it because it's not going to look very pretty. It's not going to look like that designer quality if you don't match it. Here's another wool. This one I've also chosen to do in a suit, but this was very soft. It wasn't that menswear at all. Therefore, I made this into a soft dressmaker styling. It sort of has unpressed pleats at the waist, and it has a more feminine styling than the other one did because of its soft hand, because it wasn't that crisp, masculine type fabric that the last one was. So again, it's listening to the fabric and doing what it would like to have done to it. Here's one that has little berries all over it. And this was kind of a fun fabric to work with. I had no intention of doing this probably when I bought the fabric, but after I got it home and tried to decide what to do with it, I thought, look at all those little berries that are woven right into the fabric. Now, wouldn't it be easy? You don't have to be an artist. Everybody can do this successfully. All you do is put a little fiber fill between layers. That's quilt batting. You pull off a little bit of that quilt batting and spread it out thin. And it was putting some of that between layers because instead of interfacing, that made it puff out slightly so that it worked out very nicely to emphasize those berries. Another one that I thought about is this one, and always when I bring the fabric home, if I am going to wash it later, then I'll wash it and dry it before I ever start so that I know what to expect of it. What I found with this one is that it needed nothing as it got out of the dryer. It was ready to go. It was ready to wear. Therefore, I made these complicated little cups and saucers on the shoulder because no way you could iron these, but you don't have to, as long as it's a fabric that doesn't need any work done to it. This one, on the other hand, came out kind of a mess. And so because of that, this one was made into the very simplest style I could think of, just a shell to wear under a suit, because it won't need any ironing, any pressing, or it will rather, but I can do it very nicely because of the very simple styling. So again, I was letting the fabric speak. If your fabric is very ravelly, then use that as a positive, not as a negative. We of course are going to have to, with that ravelly fabric, we're going to have to finish all the seams so that they won't ravel, but it's kind of a good idea to do something of this sort. Use that raveling and make it really ravel. I did all this shaggy finish here and put it through the washer and dryer to let it really shag. It makes a fun jacket for a very casual thing. And then here are some pleats that I've done. And with these little outfits, this one was a striped fabric, so I pleated every other stripe out. I pleated all the white out so that just the color would show, and then I stitched across it. This is really easy pleating. It's pleat vertically with the iron, it's stitched horizontally with the machine, and it's very, very little work. So let me show you how that was done. That's just taking a piece of fabric, and I'm going to put that fabric on the ironing surface here and pleat it very, very easily. And that's by taking some pins at each end. So here I've put the first pleat in, and then I'll pleat the rest of it. So it's just putting a pleat in each end. Let's take a pin here so that we can pleat that. And so on all the way down. Just put all the pleats you want to for whatever area it is that you're pleating. Get those pins in, stretch it out very tautly each time you do it, and then press it all down, either on the press, the Husky press back there, or with an iron. Either way, press all that down nicely. And I've hurried this along so I won't spend so much time on it. But what I've done then after I had this all pressed in place is take a piece of Scotch tape, or that pink hair setting tape works out nicely. And it's just a matter of taping all the pleats down, but where you are not going to sew is where you tape them. So I'd tape here and here because I'm going to sew in the white area in between. And then after you have those all taped down, be sure that you pin that to some stabilizer, because you don't want to just stitch through that fabric alone. What would happen is it would pucker and it wouldn't look really pretty. You want to instead make sure that you have the stabilizer underneath so that you can have everything nice and straight when you do it. Now what I've already done is just a quick machine basting stitch there, so that with that basting stitch I could hold those pleats in place temporarily, and I could also pull it out later if it shows and if I don't want it to show, which of course I wouldn't. And what I'm going to dial here, I've already done one row of little hearts. Now this is for a child's garment, and that child has very definitely won my heart. This is my little granddaughter, Amanda. Amanda, my love, I call her, and so this heart is very appropriate for her, since she's just the love of my life. So we're going to do some little hearts right down this stripe. Your machine probably has all kinds of wonderful things that you can press a button and dial whatever pattern you want. So try that out, see what happens. And as I come to the end of the line and pull it out, there I have little hearts, another row of them. So fun thing to do. You could also, instead of pleating this if you chose, you could also gather it and make it look like hand smocking, which I've done over here. This has just been gathered, and what this is a little sunsuit for that same little doll. And with this sunsuit, I have just gathered it all on some horizontal hearts, and then I've done some decorative stitching. So this is done the very same way, just by gathering it and stitching it in place. And here I'll just dial a different stitch, a wavy one is what I'm doing here, and stitch that down, but same thing. And what this looks like is that very expensive hand smocking. And nice to be able to do it all this fast and yet have it look like what you do with smocking. So here's just one row, and I'll pull it out so you can see what that looks like. And I didn't try too hard to get those rows to line up, but it does this so beautifully with your decorative stitches. So another way of using the fabric to its advantage and seeing what you can come out with. I'll get these things out of the way. And okay, then after you have this, I'll get this back inside, I guess. After you have this all stitched then all the way along, I do all the stitching, and then I'd get my pattern piece out that I'm going to use. In this case, it's a little blouse pattern. And I'd put this on and get it pinned in place and go ahead and cut out the pattern, and then you're ready to just proceed. And it's just very easy to do this as though you had some unpleated fabric. You don't even let the pleats bother you. But look what I'm doing right here. I'm going to cut off some of that nice stitching, and I don't want to do that. So what you do with the pieces that you cut off is think of some other project that you can use those little bit of pleats for. What I've done used those pleats for here is in this belt. I've put little windows through the suede so that it shows through. And that again is using the fabric. Now if you'd like to do some more of this pleating very easily, and if you don't have any stripes to look at, if you therefore have to do something else with solid fabric or with a print fabric. Remember that blouse I had up here a minute ago that I said it's going to take some, I have it down here, it slipped off the table, but I said it was going to take a bit of doing to get it pressed just right. Well, I'm going to use that to my advantage too and do some pressing. What I've done here is some pleats that I've put in this belt. And the way I did those pleats was with this little pleater that you can find in the catalogs where you send away for things. And I've used this very same fabric, and I don't have a scrap, so I'll just pleat a little bit of my blouse. But I'm not going to cut it up and put it in a belt. Okay, I'll just pleat a little bit of this in the pleater by using a credit card and pushing that fabric in. And you just keep pushing this in all the way along very easily, very nicely. If I would stand up, I could do it a little bit better, couldn't I? And then after you have all of this pleated that you want to for the area that you're going to cover, I'll help it along there by raising it slightly. After you have all this pleated, then you of course put your iron down on it and get it all pressed nicely in place. You're also then going to put some fusible material on to fuse it, and I've covered it up then with the ultra suede on top. Here I did the same thing to these flowers, and they work out so well. When you don't have the stripes to follow, that's when you'd want to use the pleater. I wouldn't use that pleater with stripes because it's easier to go without. I can get everything done just right. So this is only for solids, for florals, for something else that you don't have definite lines to follow, and you need a little help to do that. Another pleated fabric that I have down here that was really fun to work with is this one. Now this is really pleated. This is done kind of in the way, are you familiar with the designer Mary McFadden? Well, most things that you see that belong to Mary McFadden are kind of like this. They're a whole lot of pleats, and this one's ruffled at the edge. Those pleats could also have been done instead of vertically, they could have been done horizontally, so you could have done them this way. Or Diane Fries is another designer who does a lot of these pleated fabrics, and these are all at very expensive designer prices. So take some tips from them, and some of the things that you'd see them do is, for instance, you use this fabric and see how a little bit of it, 5 inches here, stretches out easily to about a foot. It stretches a whole lot. So you use that quality and try anytime you possibly can to not have to put a hem in this, because that would stretch it out and make it a little bit different quality. So whenever I can, I would definitely use the hem that came in it. Here, I can find one over here, yes. This is that selvage edge. That's what I'd use whenever I possibly can and not put a hem in it. But when I use it in places where I've had to cut it up and therefore I need to do a hem, that's the place where you do a serger hem with a little rolled edge. And as you put that rolled edge on, it does something kind of nice to it in that what it does here, as you can see, I'll just stitch off the end. But what I've done here is make a little ruffled hem. Now that didn't show before when I had the selvage edge there. Then it was very straight and just nicely pleated. But now with the serger hem, it ruffles. You use this to your advantage by perhaps putting a ruffle around the neck, a ruffled stand-up collar, maybe that would work well. Short sleeves, summery outfit with little ruffled butterfly-looking sleeves around there. So think where you could use this feature, as long as your machines do it very nicely. What could you do with it? This fabric, by the way, is kind of interesting in that what do you do with it when you get it home from the store? As you buy it in the store, they have it rolled around this whole big bolt, and it has paper in between to keep it pleated up nicely in place. But once you get it home, it isn't that way at all. So resist the tendency or the temptation to fold it. You're in trouble if you fold it, so don't do that at all. What you would want to do with this instead is get some more of this out of the way. In fact, I'll get it out of the way down here perhaps. Table. Okay, what you would want to do with this instead is something nice of this sort. Can you imagine doing this to a fabric? But this is exactly what I would do to my fabric when I get it home from the store. I would instead store it like this. Also, when I go traveling, I would pack it this way, and it would come out without a wrinkle. When I arrive at my destination, don't try to fold it, or what it's going to do to you if you fold is put little creases crosswise there, and it won't be very pretty at all. So let that fabric speak to you, and see how it's going to work. Do whatever it tells you to do. Now, what this fabric tells you, of course, is that it's a blouse, a dress, a skirt. It's something that just hangs softly and flows and works very nicely with these pleats. But if I would at times decide that I don't want to do it this way, I want to instead talk back to that fabric and do something that I want to do rather than what it wants me to do with it. That's when I might do a little bit more fusing, a little pressing. Okay, here's the fabric as it was, but if I would fuse that to a piece of fusible fleece, it would come out like this. And of course, with fusible fleece, you know, just fuse it. And what I would do with that, by the way, is make this belt. So whatever it is that you're doing, think it through. Let your fabric speak and listen to anything it says if you want to be completely satisfied with the finished results. There are times, however, as I said with this fabric that I fuse to something, that I really don't want to do what it tells me to do. Maybe I want to do something completely contrary. What this used to be was a very thin blouse fabric, and it wrinkled terribly. There was no way I could pack and travel with it because it was just a wrinkled mess when I arrived. So what I did is talk back to that fabric, and I have made it into something completely different, a jacket, a quilted jacket. Now, by changing the character, which is what I did when I quilted the layers together, by changing the character, I can make it do things which it was never intended to do. So this now is going to go through the washer and the dryer, and it's going to pack and go on vacation or to work with me as I pack and travel. And it's just a really fun thing to do, and we're going to do several of these next session. We're going to make several quilted garments and see how we can add a new dimension to your sewing. So come back with us next week. Join us then, and let's see what else we can have fun with it.